everybody, welcome to Homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. In this video, we're going to look at a new entry for space on my quotes A through Z spreadsheet. So far I have 3 quotes under space, and they're all from Brigham Young. I'm sure that there's more, but I just keep coming across statements from Brigham Young. And so I'm going to read the most recent one, which is earlier than the other 2. This can be found in Journal of Discourses, Volume 1, page 351. If I look through my telescope and my friends inquire how far I can see, I tell them I can see anything in sight, no matter how far from me the object may be, but I cannot see anything out of sight, or that which is beyond the power of the instrument. Okay, so this is getting into how do we know what we know, what's within the realm of what we can observe, right? And this is a big question when it comes to God. Some people stop right there and they're like, well, I don't see God. He doesn't exist. Things like that. Okay, continuing. So it is in the intellectual faculties of mankind. It is easy for them to see that which is before their eyes, but when the object is out of sight, it is a difficult matter for them to see it, and they are at a loss how to form an estimate of it, or what position to put themselves in so as to see the object they desire to see. In regard to eternal things, they are all out of sight to them, and will so remain unless the Lord lifts the curtain. The only reason why I cannot see the heavy range of mountains situated in the middle states, I'll skip that part, situated in the middle states is because of the natural elevations that raise themselves betwixt me and them above the level of my eye, making them out of sight to me. Why cannot we behold all things in space? Because there is a curtain dropped, which makes them out of sight to us. Why cannot we behold the inhabitants of Kolob, or the inhabitants in any of those distant planets? For the same reason, because there is a curtain dropped that interrupts our vision. So it is, something intervenes between us and them, which we cannot penetrate. We are short-sighted and deprived of the knowledge which we might have. I might say this is right without offering any explanation. So, I want to talk about this. Okay, there's a lot of people that trust in science, and rightly so. They trust in science, they trust in history, they trust in all these things that have been observed and recorded by mankind. That's one way that we've gained knowledge, but we have to acknowledge that not all of it is right. For example, science is still going on. Science has not been completed. It's an ongoing effort. So we haven't reached the totality of knowledge, number one. And that's a very serious problem if you're going to claim that God doesn't exist or this isn't the true church or whatever. Until we know for sure that science has been completed and it's done, there's nothing else to explore or discover, then there's still some pretty big questions out there, because who knows what's going to happen and what you might discover. Right? So there's a lot of people, and disturbingly within our church, and I know that you've come across them, that are very worldly and materially minded. In other words, they pretty much only trust in what they can see or what science has to say or the world, the news, whatever. All those different sources, right? So I want to take what Brigham Young just said about this concept of just because it's out of sight doesn't mean that it's not true. And I want to get into a little bit of philosophy just really quick. Okay, this is from the philosopher David Hume. And I just want to, in case you're not familiar with this, I just want to show you a couple things. Okay, so this is from Wikipedia. The first distinction is between two different areas of human study. All the objects of human reason or inquiry may naturally be divided into 2 kinds, to wit, relation of ideas, that's 1, and matters of fact, that's 2. Of the first kind are the sciences of geometry, algebra, and arithmetic, right? These are things that are in the mind, which are discoverable by the mere operation of thought. Matters of fact, which are the second object of human reason, are not ascertained in the same manner, nor is our evidence of their truth, however great, of a like nature with the foregoing. Don't worry, we're going to dumb this down in case it kind of goes over your head. Don't worry. So he's just saying that there's two types of knowledge. Essentially, what we're able to like figure out in our heads, like 1 + 1 is 2. That's not, you don't have to like necessarily test that in the actual world. But then there's other things that you observe in the natural world. Okay, continuing. Hume's fork is often stated in such a way that statements are divided up into two types. Statements about ideas. These are just like we were talking about algebra and stuff. These are analytic, necessary, and knowable a priori. A priori is the philosophical idea that when we're born, we already have knowledge loaded into us, into our minds. You know, no one has to explain to you, uh, hey, these things look alike, these trees, and are you able to tell that all of them are a tree, even though they're not exactly the same? Somehow you're able to know that. It's like somehow you have the ability, you have the prior knowledge of what tree-ness is, like what it is to be a tree, even though it's the first time that you've ever seen this individual tree. That's just an example. Okay, continuing. So that's the first one. And then statements about the world. These are synthetic, contingent, and knowable a posteriori. So like after you've been exposed to information, essentially. In modern terminology, members of the first group are known as analytic propositions and members of the latter as synthetic propositions. This terminology comes from Kant. He was another great philosopher. Okay, in the first class, false statements such as all bodies are extended, like they have, I think that means like, bodies, like groups of like physical things, it's not just like two-dimensional, it's not just one-dimensional. But the next example is better. All bachelors are unmarried. So in this case, talking about bachelors, by definition, a bachelor is a person that's not married. So that's something that it's just in your head. It's like, oh, yeah, of course, bachelors are unmarried because that's what bachelor means. Okay, and ideas of mathematics and logic. In the second class, false statements like the sun rises in the morning and all bodies have mass, because these are things that you observe. You don't think them. It's it's something that you observe in the real world. Okay, Hume wants to prove that certainty does not exist in science. Okay, and this is something that people essentially ignore. They're just like, nope, science is good, it's good enough. But this is why I think philosophy is important. And I know that there's been a lot of philosophers after Hume and before, and there's been like these philosophical debates. I'm not up to speed with the current philosophical topics of today, but I think that this is still very valuable right here, what he's saying. So Hume wants to prove that certainty does not exist in science. First, Hume notes that the statements of the second type can never be entirely certain due to the fallibility of our senses, the possibility of deception. See the brain in a vat theory. That's the theory where it's like, well, how the heck do you know that you're not just a brain wired up to a computer? How do you know that? How can you prove that? How do you know that it's not just a simulation? That's essentially what the brain in a vat theory is. How do you know that you're not living in a simulation? And other arguments made by philosophical skeptics. It is always possible that any given statement about the world is false. Just for that reason, how the heck do you know? All right, continuing. Second, Hume claims that our belief in cause and effect relationships between events is not grounded on reason, but rather arises merely by habit or custom. For example, whenever someone on earth lets go of a stone, it falls, end quote. While we can grant that in every instance thus far, when a rock is dropped on earth, it went down, this does not make it logically necessary that in the future rocks will fall in the same circumstances. You get that? I know it sounds crazy, and we have to live in like practicality, what we've observed in the past. You know that when you flip a light switch, it's going to turn on, but you don't really know. It's impossible. For all intents and purposes, it's impossible. Look what it says. Things of this nature rely upon the future conforming to the same principles which governed the past. Okay? But that isn't something that we can know based on past experience. All past experience could tell us is that it is in the past. The future okay. All past experience could tell us is that in the past, the future has resembled the past. So all you really know for sure is, well, it's always worked, so why won't it work this time? You have absolutely no way of knowing. You don't. Okay, third, Hume notes that relations of ideas can be used only to prove other relations of ideas and mean nothing outside the context of how they relate to each other, and therefore tell us nothing about the world. So, for example, take this statement: an equilateral triangle has three sides of equal length. While some earlier philosophers, most notably Plato and Descartes, held the logical statements such as these contained the most formal reality, since they are always true and unchanging, Hume held that, while true, they contain no formal reality because the truth of the statements rest on the definitions of the words involved, and not on actual things in the world, since there is no such thing as a true triangle or exact equality of length in the world. So, for this reason, relations of ideas cannot be used to prove matters of fact. So, in other words, no one has seen a perfect circle, for example. We know how to describe it in our minds. We can mathematically describe a perfect circle in our minds. And by the way, that brings you to an interesting problem where you come across pi, how when you take the measurement of the diameter of a circle and wrap it around the circumference of the circle, you come up with an interesting mathematical problem where it's a number that just keeps going. So it's three diameters plus 0.15 or sorry 1415925 and so on. So in reality, no one has ever, at least in this life, has ever seen a perfect circle. When you get a microscope and you go all the way down to a perfect circle that's on a piece of paper, you're going to get to the point where you see atoms. Well, you can't see atoms, but if you had an electron microscope, you would realize that there's breaks and there's spaces. There's no such thing as a absolutely perfect circle, because it basically can't exist in this reality. So he's saying that um, it's nice to talk about things like that, but again, you're using words based on your thoughts, right? Anyway, continuing. The results claimed by Hume as consequences of his fork are drastic. According to him, relations of ideas can be proved with certainty by using other relations of ideas. However, they don't really mean anything about the world. So it's like saying that you can find consistency within, let's just keep using math. You can find consistency in it, but it's not, you can't prove that it's actually tied to the world itself. It's something that we all kind of agree upon, but can you really, really match it to what is actually in the world? And there's a lot of talk about that. I've seen a bunch of videos recently about math and how is it really real. And of course it is. I'm not saying that any things aren't, and neither is he. But we're looking at the structure of reality and how we know things. This is epistemology. Um, okay, let me just continue. Okay, so because of this, matters of fact. Wait. Since they don't mean anything about the world, okay, like math, it doesn't mean, you can't really bridge that gap. Relations of ideas cannot be used to prove matters of fact. Because of this, matters of fact have no certainty and therefore cannot be used to prove anything. Only certain things can be used to prove other things for certain. Now, this is where, in my mind, the spirit comes in. For all you know, this life is a deception, you're in a simulation, you're under a spell, you're in a dream, whatever you want to, whatever. But I think as members of the church, we can know through the Spirit the certainty of things. That's like the most real thing that you can experience. Let me put it this way. You take the sum of human knowledge and experience and measurements and experiments and exploring and da 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 da, and basically like it's a big collection of just like, well, we've seen this, and well, it's normally this. That's what science is. I mean, that's like an oversimplification, but if you think about it, it's just the total sum of human experimentation and observation that is pretty consistent when you uh, offer something up to somebody else to prove. That's like the definition. They can also perform the same experiment and come up with the same result. But that doesn't tell us anything about what's actually happening in life. All it means is that as we've done our experiments, as we've done our measurements and all these things, there's like a consistency, but we don't really know outside of what's happened in the past. Does that make sense? And so, in other words, there's not somebody there to tell you with absolute certainty, yes, you got the right answer. Pi, that is a real thing, or there is such a thing as a perfect square. It would require God, because God is the creator of those things. He's the one that can provide certainty. And that's what we receive through the Spirit. The Spirit testifies of things, right? And so I would argue that the most real thing that you could possibly experience is a subjective experience where you, inside of yourself, feel the Spirit testifying to you. So going back to Brigham Young, he's essentially talking about this same thing. It's like, well, we're kind of limited by our instruments. Like, we can do our best and try and measure things and look really far, but there's a curtain. There's things that we do not know. And God will lift that curtain at some point. Right now they're out of sight. In some of these other quotes that we've gone over, he's talked about the inhabitants of the moon and the sun, which to our science is ridiculous. But in reality, how do you know that there's not another, some people would call it another sphere of existence, dimension, phase of reality? Use whatever word you want. Maybe if we had spiritual eyes, maybe if we were translated or whatever, the moon would look entirely different to us, because maybe we don't see everything that's there. There's a curtain, there's a veil over our eyes. So that's why, to me, the most real thing really is my experiences with Heavenly Father, the Spirit, and why I trust the prophets so much over the reasoning of the world. Okay, a long way to get to this point. That's really the most real thing. If you have faith and it's been confirmed to you that the Lord, that God is real, that He speaks through the prophets, and this really is His church, that is more real. That is more real than anything else, because other things can be faked, and they can be tampered with too, especially things like history, science, you name it. Okay, well, that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.